Hey everyone, it's Gregory with eGuide, and I have a friend, partner of eGuide, and all-around amazing human being, Emily, with me today. Emily is one of our classified as kind of a coaching client, but is definitely more than that. She's allows us to help her with projects pertaining to some of her initiatives outside of her 9-to-5 job, but then also kind of uses us to help move some of the project planning forward for her 9-to-5 job. So let's start with the 9-to-5. Emily, can you tell everyone what you do for a living?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. I am a senior field marketing manager and small business expert at Yelp. So in the pre-COVID world, I was speaking at conferences, trade shows, conventions, all about Yelp's free tools, as well as online reputation management and digital marketing. Now in a post-COVID world, I do virtual education, but I also am working on other content initiatives, whether that's blog content. We're hosting a virtual summit in March, as well as a podcast that we launched back in October.
Yeah, speaking of that podcast, a kind of a really great opportunity that came out of the word that everyone hates and loves to say, a pivot in the time of COVID. It's in partnership with Entrepreneur, and you're the host. And tell everyone a little bit about what each podcast episode is.
Yeah, so every episode is about 15 to 20 minutes. It's called Behind the Review, and it features a conversation with a business owner as well as a reviewer who's written them a Yelp review. So I do separate interviews with both of those folks, and then I weave together their takeaways, their learnings, their high experiences, and I create a story that's not only entertaining for consumers and people who love to support small local business, but also some of those business takeaways, whether that's social media or customer service or leadership skills, and just kind of make it a little entertaining and intentional takeaway storytelling episode.
Absolutely. And they're concise. They're that 15-minute spot. You can binge listen to a couple episodes. And it just launched in November of last year.
Yeah, actually, it was November. You're right after the election.
Absolutely. So newer podcast for Yelp, newer project for Emily. And then outside of your 9-to-5, you're an advocate for mental health. You're an all-around very open and honest person about your own struggles with mental health. And you operate a blog called Bipolar Brought Balance. Tell everyone what that is.
Yeah, so I launched Bipolar Brought Balance in October of 2019. It was my 1-year anniversary of being hospitalized for a manic episode where I then was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and I went through about 3 months of intensive treatment and therapy. And a lot of my experiences with mental health have had a layer of privilege to them, not only having the job I have at Yelp, having the support with medical insurance, as well as friends and family who were open to supporting me and still treating me, with respect and acknowledging that I'm the same person, but now we just know a little bit more about my brain as well as, my moods. And so I have been actively working to maintain balance in my life and work forward with that diagnosis as a part of who I am instead of a hindrance to my future. And so I use that blog as well as my Instagram account to share my story and talk about ways that other people can address and identify their mental health, whether they have a diagnosis or not. So I often speak on topics such as work-life balance, relationships, boundary setting, all things that I wish I would have achieved before my diagnosis, but I really needed that permission, if you will, to have something serious to make me prioritize my mental health. So I try to share some of that and humanize my experience so other people can feel comfortable and maybe identify and acknowledge their own mental health.
Absolutely. And it's incredible. I get the privilege of reading every piece before it goes live on the blog. And it's just a great firsthand telling of some current events, of just some of the true raw emotion behind kind of your experiences with mental health. And it's a great just kind of guiding resource for people who are going through those same struggles as well, which is wonderful. So getting into some of the projects at hand for the year, we've actually been partnering together for almost a year already, if you can believe that, which is incredible. And as our partnership has grown, we've been able to kind of outline some of those big initiatives for the year that we want to tackle. And as we're, entering 2021, as we're entering what life will look like post-COVID, hopefully, we definitely wanted to incorporate an exercise and a tool to help us align some of those goals for the year. So I introduced a tool called V2MOM, which if you take a look at the description of this video or take a look at the eGuide blog, there's a lot of content in January about V2MOM, but basically it stands for values, visions, measures, obstacles, and methods. And it's a great exercise that was created by Mark Benioff at Salesforce, and it's used to either align personal goals or business goals, or in this case, we're talking about BBB goals and some of your Yelp professional goals, like the podcast. So taking through an example from kind of beginning to end, I have your V2MOM board. We're using Trello. There's also a blog post that you can take a look at that has a bunch of tips on how to actualize and keep yourself accountable with your V2MOM exercise after you've done it using Trello, that you can find on our blog as well. But one of the big, visions for the year for BBB is to hopefully gain a little bit more of a following and gain some guest appearances on podcasts or publications or so on and so forth. So thinking through that thread, how does that tie into some of the methods and measures that we've been working through, and how are you using like V2MOM as a tool to kind of get to that end vision for the year?
Yeah, so I think that's a really great example to kind of walk through how this works for me. The end goal of being featured places is something that I could put out there as a goal for the year and try to maybe spend a few Fridays sending pitch emails and see what I pick up. But in reality, when we set a goal like that, it's something that throughout the year, then I always feel like I'm thinking of it as something I'm behind on because I don't have a plan for how I'm going to accomplish it. I just want it to happen. And so if I haven't gotten a placement, maybe I'll think like, okay, I need to spend some more time on that. But without a plan for how I'm going to get there, it was really hard to measure, but also hold myself accountable to these goals. And so with V2MOM, we broke down what my vision is, but then we went beyond that and we said, okay, in order to accomplish that vision of being featured, how can I get there? And the first step is, what can I do on a daily or weekly basis to make this feasible? So we broke it all the way down to frequency that I would be journaling, as well as publishing pieces on my blog. And those are related because even setting the goal for about 4 blog posts a month, which is what we're setting our goal as, the steps to get to that from what I produced last year, which was about 1 a month, needed to be broken down even further. So I can't just set a goal for write 4 blog posts a month after doing 1 all of last year. I need to say, okay, in order to write those 4 blog posts, I need to have a plan before the month starts of 4 topics I could hit on. And so you and I really broke that down all the way away from the vision to almost a point where you're so granular in the daily actions or the weekly actions that the bigger goal is just going to happen. And I think a good example or something people could relate to is, let's say you're doing new fitness videos for, weights or working out. If you set a goal for your weight loss, but you don't set a goal for how many times you're going to do exercises during the week, it's really, really hard to get there. So that's what I did with my BBB, is broke down the daily and weekly practices that are going to set me up to get the content out the door at the volume that we really want to see.
Absolutely. And I think you hit on a lot of those key elements of how V2MOM works with that, in the fact that the actual measures of it are the ones that we can assign due dates to. And that's where we're kind of focusing the most attention on, is if we do our 4 posts per month, and the measure that's attached to that is one of those, just to produce that volume of content, like you were saying, is it has to be a little bit more formulaic. It's not discrediting the content that we're producing. It's just making it a little bit easier on the lift of doing this consistent cadence of new content. So we generated a method of doing a newsroom style piece of content. We know that the obstacle within that is always going to be kind of a time and bandwidth factor. So if we know that the obstacle is making sure that we're carving out that time, we're planning for that in the process already. And the method attached to that, overcoming that obstacle, is that we're blocking time on your calendar each and every week to produce that new blog content and material. And that's going to all tie back to the actual vision, which is hopefully gaining additional readership within the blog. And then that newsroom style piece is actually going to be featuring some potential podcasts that you can use as a warm intro to potentially be featured on their publication as well, which is the actual vision for the year. And where kind of those values come into play is that everything has to be, those core values that you've listed out for me. So authentic, vulnerable, with intentional communication, and achieving that balance. And I think those all go into, how do we make this newsroom style piece feel authentic, feel vulnerable, not formulaic. And I think that's where it all kind of plays together. So that to me is a great example from beginning to end on how the V2MOM exercise works in one instance. I think there's another instance, to just take it into your 9-to-5 realm, of the podcast. So part of your vision for your professional development side this year is to become more of a personality through the podcast. How is V2MOM kind of helping you achieve that vision for the year, would you say?
Yeah, so I think in that regard, it's similar in we break down the goals or the actions that I'm going to take to hopefully yield what I'm hoping to see. But I think it's interesting when you mentioned obstacles in relation to the last example, that plays a big role here as well. I think the obstacles portion of V2MOM is very helpful because it allows you to be honest about what might get in your way. And so with the work stuff, the honesty between you and I is that oftentimes if I'm doing something extra for work, to hit some initiative or goal, the obstacle for me personally is if I'm overwhelmed or I have a lot on my plate, I am okay with deprioritizing or pushing something like that off. And so if you and I can identify that as an obstacle and proactively work around it by saying, okay, if this is something we push off, what's our safety net? And in the instance of work and becoming a personality, it's resharing or pulling things that have already happened to fill that gap of content or connection. So one example is becoming more of a personality for work is finding authentic ways to share the show and give my personality or background. And so even setting a method of putting those episodes on LinkedIn and taking the time to write a post on LinkedIn, the content's already built, right? The blog posts for every episode are produced. They're on the Entrepreneur website. They're on the Yelp website. So me carving out 10 or 15 minutes to take that existing link, share it on a platform that I'm not constantly using. And, my pre-goal setting life, LinkedIn was kind of a background platform for me. And how can I grab the existing components, put it on my calendar as an action item, and follow it through by just getting ahead of my personal obstacles and my personal barriers to that achievement. And so, I think that takes it full circle where I have a goal, I want to achieve it. I have a set of, what I would consider to be success, which is actually sharing those episodes and other content, such as other interviews I've done. But the safety net is identifying why I might work around that goal and change that goal because I don't have the drive, and how I can maintain, hitting what I want to while I get all that other work done. And it's just about being a little bit smarter and more strategic than just trying to do it willy-nilly and again hit some goal without knowing what action items I need to take to be successful.
Yeah, and that's you hit it right on the head of your example with LinkedIn. Is it's one thing to have a method of sharing things out to LinkedIn. It's another step to say, I'm making a commitment to do 3 articles per month that I'm sharing out on LinkedIn. And that metric is what I'm helping you achieve in our conversations. But it's really also easy for me to take a look at the measures list and say, hey, we wanted 10 posts here on Instagram, we wanted 3 on LinkedIn, we wanted 4 new blog content posts a month. And I know if we achieve these things, we will kind of move ourselves closer to achieving those larger vision goals. So having that accountability, factor in this as well, of someone, whether it's a friend or a colleague or a boss or mentor or a coach like I am to you, to be there and help revise and continue to tweak what those actual measures are, so that we're inching closer to it. Because that's the hardest thing about any goal setting for the year, and in my opinion, is great, everyone can make New Year's resolutions or have intentions for the year, but until you're like boiling it down and extracting, these are the exact things that I'm going to do to each and every week or each and every month or each and every quarter to achieve that, like then it's so much easier to have 3 months go by and not do anything to move towards that goal. And then by then it's like, it was a good attempt, but we failed, so we're just going to give up,
Well, and I think the nice thing about V2MOM is, let's say you're setting lofty, audacious goals, which I think is good, especially if you're beginning of the year trying to hit some larger end goal. But the best thing about V2MOM is, to your point, if some of those start to break down, we can come back to the V2MOM, identify what we're not hitting on metric wise, and then reevaluate and reassess, as opposed to just saying, oh, we didn't hit that goal, I'm not sure why, let's change the goal. It's like, okay, we didn't hit that goal, here's how we thought we were going to get there. Was that not the right part of the equation? Or do we need to just break down those to-dos even further? Do we need to give ourselves more of a one foot in front of the other to move forward? And it helps be able to come back and evaluate success along with the steps to achieve what you're hoping for.
Absolutely. And on that note as well, like with some of the newer projects. So let's be real, for the year, the likelihood of us going back to hopefully a non-COVID environment mid to late year, hopefully is likely. So there's nothing to say that your boss or the C-level suite of your job are going to come in and say, okay, we want your team to start taking on XYZ as a new shiny project. I think that's where those the value side of things comes back into play. Is if you are assigned a task, how can you take that back to those core values for yourself? How can you take then the visions for the year and start to apply, if it is a new project or something that you're required to do, how can you tie that back to some of the initiatives as well? And I think that acts always as a great mirror and kind of a North Star for any new project that might be coming out through the year. Any thoughts on that?
No, I think that's exactly right. And I also think, just in general, by setting these values for myself, I was able to create overlap and connection between the two parts of my life. And to your point, it helps me identify and evaluate if other opportunities that maybe I didn't envision or plan for are worth my time, right? Do they tie back into a value of mine? Do they maybe indirectly help me achieve another goal? Or are they pulling me in a completely different direction? And do I maybe need to have a dialogue about if this makes sense, if I'm the right person, et cetera. I think it gives me a good foundation to not have to just be in my head and evaluate that. I've set this out, not in stone, but a little bit in stone for me to continue to come back to and say, hey, let's not get too far off track. New opportunities are great. Things we don't expect are always going to come up, but we have a little bit of a North Star for the year, and we can see if things are tying back to those overall goals.
Absolutely. And I know I kind of forced you into doing this exercise. You didn't really have an option, but I'm sure you've done other kind of New Year's goal settings or goal setting exercises before. If you have one in mind, is there something that you can compare this to, or even with other years that you can compare it to, how this is different, better, worse, the same, as it applies to, I know there's like goal setting journals out there. There's other, New Year's workshops people can do. We're using V2MOM. How is it feeling so far?
Yeah, I think the best thing for me about it is I have different layers of a goal, right? So a goal isn't just this big thing that's kind of arbitrary. It's very detailed, but I feel like I still have flexibility within this plan, which is really good because sometimes when I do goal setting, especially at the start of the year, which I haven't done for a long time because I think that's pretty arbitrary in and of itself. It's a good way to kind of time things out. But when you and I made this plan together, it's like, okay, I'm making a plan for the year, but I'm evaluating this on a weekly basis in terms of progress, in terms of, you know, how realistic it is. And so for that reason, I really like this strategy. It allowed me to make annual longer term goals, but it gave me the detailed layers to do things more on a weekly basis, which I don't think I've ever done in goal setting before. If anything, and especially I'm thinking in the work world, we'll set quarterly goals and maybe talk about how it gets broken down into months as far as pacing, but we never really reevaluate the goal until the date of hitting said goal has passed. And I think with V2MOM, you're never really evaluating things in retrospect. You're always evaluating things as you move forward. And so that's what I really love about it. I can change things within this plan. If 2021 throws something at me like 2020 did, we can still pivot, but I have a lot of foundation. It's not a loose foundation of goals that are just going to go out the window. It's a pretty detailed plan that has the flexibility to be modified, but it goes beyond just what I hope to achieve into what I need to accomplish to get there.
Absolutely. Yep. And I couldn't have said it better myself. So thank you for living and breathing this exercise with me. I'm super excited to see how it kind of plays out in throughout the year. I would be happy to have a conversation with you mid-year to check in, because I feel like that's also a huge factor, as we hear so much about, intentions for the year in January, and no one does a recap of okay, how did this actually play out? We're already a month in, we made the plan in December to go live with it in January. But I know for a fact that it will work because we live in our Trello board where our V2MOM is living twice a week. So I know we're going to have that accountability and conversation with it. So I would invite you back to let's check in July and tell everyone how it's going. Does that sound good?
Absolutely. And if you don't have, a coach type person working with you on this, if you're setting V2MOM goals for work, I think it's easy enough to check in with a colleague or two, whether it's weekly, bi-monthly, and just say, hey, here are my goals and here are the factors I'm using to measure it. Just wanted to put it out there in the world for accountability's sake. And I've found, even in working with you, if I just say certain goals outright that I want to accomplish, whether they're in the board or they're just week by week, that's so helpful. And so, I think validating and verbalizing your goals can really help you have some accountability, whether it's from yourself, your colleagues, a coach, whoever it might be.
Absolutely. And there's so much that you can do if you're operating solo within some of the technology aspect of it as well. And again, we have a whole blog post written specifically about the accountability factor of doing some of these goal setting for the year. So I would highly recommend checking that out as well. Emily, thank you so much for your partnership and your honesty and always your openness. It's always a joy to share some of your world with our community as well. And I'm excited for the year ahead for you.
Thanks for having me. I'm so glad we can do this together.
Absolutely.